what happened when you stopped arguing with your parents? My mom discovered environmentalism and suddenly decided our family was killing the planet. First, she just had us use reusable bags, but then she spiraled into monitoring everyone's carbon footprint and water usage. One morning, she stood outside the bathroom door and yelled, "You've flushed 3 times today. Do you know how many gallons of water that is? From now on, this family is going completely zero waste." My dad tried to suggest moderation because my mom was always jumping full throttle into new obsessions, but mom was already pulling out a color-coded chart of new household rules. "If it's yellow, let it mellow," she announced. "And we're composting everything, no exceptions." I told her I was totally on board and ready to save the planet. I stopped flushing entirely, even when it wasn't yellow, and our bathroom started smelling like a festival porta-potty. When Mom's book club came over, her friend asked if our septic tank was broken, while I explained loudly that Mom said flushing was wasteful. The ladies sat uncomfortably in our living room trying not to breathe through their noses while Mom opened every window despite it being 40 degrees outside. Then I started composting everything like she'd said, including meat, dairy, and my brother's failed science experiment. The compost bin turned into a horror show of maggots and smell that attracted every raccoon in the neighborhood. Mom tried to explain that some things shouldn't be composted, but I reminded her she'd said no exceptions, and accused her of not caring about methane emissions from landfills. I refused to use any electricity because Mom had mentioned our carbon footprint, so I did homework by candlelight and wouldn't use the microwave, forcing everyone to eat cold leftovers. When Mom tried to drive me to school, I said cars were destroying the ozone and made her walk with me the 3 miles each way. She had to leave for work an hour early just to get me there on time, arriving at her office sweaty and exhausted. Then I announced I was limiting myself to 1 60-second shower per week to conserve water. By day 5, my chemistry teacher pulled me aside to ask if everything was okay at home, because other students were complaining about the smell. The school counselor called Mom to discuss hygiene neglect, and Mom had to explain that I was actually trying to save water while they documented her answers suspiciously. I started bringing our trash to school in my backpack, because throwing things away was wasteful, and I wanted to find ways to reuse everything. When my backpack leaked old coffee grounds and banana peels in history class, the principal called Mom about my disturbing behavior of hoarding garbage. Mom had to come get me and my bag of composting trash while other parents watched her load decomposing waste into her car. Her sister visited for dinner and I served everything on leaves I'd collected from the yard because washing dishes wastes water. When she asked for toilet paper in the bathroom, I handed her the family cloth system I'd made from cut-up old t-shirts that we could wash and reuse. She left immediately and called Mom later about getting me psychological help. I wore the same outfit for 2 weeks straight because the fashion industry was killing the planet, telling everyone who asked that my mom said buying new clothes was irresponsible. My teacher started sending concerned emails about my appearance, and Mom had to have multiple meetings about why her daughter smelled like compost and looked homeless. The refrigerator died when I unplugged it to save electricity, spoiling hundreds of dollars of food that I then insisted we compost, creating a mountain of rotting produce in our backyard. The neighbors complained to the HOA about the smell and the rats, and Mom got fined for creating a health hazard. She tried to plug the fridge back in, but I'd already filled it with seedlings I was growing for our new victory garden. Mom's coworkers started avoiding her because she smelled like our house, which now had the distinct aroma of fermented garbage and unwashed humans. Her boss suggested she work from home until she resolved whatever was happening, and I overheard her crying to Dad that her career was falling apart because of the zero-waste lifestyle. She finally snapped when I announced I'd signed us up to host her company's quarterly meeting at our house to show everyone how an eco-friendly family lived. "Cancel it," she begged. But I explained that I'd already sent emails from her account about our composting toilet system I was installing and the graywater recycling demonstration I'd planned. Her face went pale as I continued. "Oh, and your mom's coming to stay next week, right? I already told her about our new lifestyle and she's excited to try the family cloth and outdoor shower system I'm building. She said she's bringing her church friends to see how we're saving the planet." Mom grabbed her phone and started typing frantically, but I added, "Too late to cancel. I already confirmed everyone this morning and told them you'd be devastated if they didn't come support your environmental journey." The doorbell rang and I smiled. That must be the documentary crew from my school's environmental club. They're doing a feature on radical zero-waste families. I opened the door, and 3 kids from my school's environmental club stood there with camera equipment, and Vinod stepped forward with his hand out for a handshake, but his smile froze when the smell from our house hit him. His 2 assistants behind him immediately pulled their shirts up over their noses, and one of them actually stepped back down the porch step, while Vinod's eyes started watering, but he tried to keep his professional face on. I grabbed his hand and shook it hard while telling them this was what real commitment to the environment smelled like, and not the fake stuff most people did with their reusable straws. Mom appeared behind me, and her face went white when she saw the cameras already rolling, and she started pushing past me to open every single window in the living room, even though it was freezing outside. The cold air rushed in, making the smell swirl around differently, but not really helping, and Mom ran to the kitchen grabbing air fresheners from under the sink until I reminded her loudly that those chemicals were destroying the ozone layer. She dropped them and they rolled across the floor while the camera guy filmed everything, and Vinod asked if we could give them a tour of our sustainable living practices. I led them straight through the house to the backyard where our compost bins sat like rotting monuments to environmental disaster, with flies buzzing everywhere despite the cold weather. The smell got 10 times worse outside, and I pointed proudly at the maggots crawling through the meat and dairy I'd thrown in there because Mom said we needed to compost everything with no exceptions. Fresh raccoon tracks circled the bins in the mud, and one fat raccoon actually sat on our fence watching us like he owned the place and was just waiting for us to go back inside. Vinod asked if this was normal for composting, and I told him Mom always said nature needed to reclaim everything we took from it, so the raccoons were just part of the cycle. The camera guy zoomed in on the maggots while his assistant kept gagging behind her shirt, and Mom stood there frozen like she didn't know whether to defend this mess or admit it was wrong. I positioned myself in front of the main camera and started talking about how Mom was a visionary, who taught me that every toilet flush was basically murdering fish in the ocean, and that showering more than once a week was selfish. Mom's mouth opened and closed like a fish herself, while I explained how she inspired me to save water by only taking 60-second showers every 7 days, which was why I smelled a little different from other kids. The crew kept exchanging looks, and the assistant whispered something to Vinod, who nodded but kept filming while Mom's hands started shaking. Right then, Dad's car pulled into the driveway and he got out looking confused at all the camera equipment until he saw Mom's panicked face and tried to lighten things up. He said at least we were saving money on the water bill, but nobody laughed and the silence stretched. So long you could hear the flies buzzing around the compost bins. Mom shot him this desperate look like she was drowning, and he mumbled something about needing to find something in the garage and basically ran away from the cameras. My phone started ringing on speaker because I always kept it on speaker to save battery, and the school counselor's voice filled the backyard saying she needed to schedule an urgent meeting about hygiene concerns raised by multiple teachers. Mom lunged for my phone, but I held it up high and let the whole message play while explaining to the camera that some people just didn't understand what real environmental commitment looked like. Catherine Bridges' voice kept going about how this was becoming a serious issue affecting my education and the learning environment for other students while Mom tried to grab the phone from my hands. Vinod asked if we wanted to pause filming, but I said no way, because transparency was important for environmental activists, and Mom looked like she might cry. I turned back to the camera and mentioned that Grandma Yvonne was coming tomorrow, and she was bringing her whole church group to see our eco-friendly lifestyle that Mom had been posting about on social media. Mom went completely pale and pulled out her phone typing frantically while I described the tour I'd planned, including our family cloth toilet paper system made from old t-shirts that we washed and reused. The cameraman actually stopped filming and asked if I was serious about the toilet paper thing, and I showed him the basket of cloth squares in our bathroom while his assistant made retching sounds. The doorbell rang again, and we all went to the front, where an HOA representative stood holding a bright orange notice, and the second he got close to our porch, his whole face changed. He backed up quickly, saying the smell was even worse than the complaints described, and started taking photos of our front yard where some garbage bags had been torn open by raccoons in the night. Mom tried to explain that we were working on the situation, but he was already writing on his clipboard about a $500 fine for health code violations and creating a public nuisance. While everyone was distracted at the front door, Mom snuck to her laptop in the kitchen trying to cancel her company's quarterly meeting, but when she logged into her email, her phone started going crazy with notifications. I'd already sent confirmation emails from her account to all 40 people about the eco-friendly house tour and sustainable lunch I'd be preparing from our compost vegetables, and everyone was responding with excitement about learning our zero-waste secrets. Her hands shook as she read message after message from coworkers saying they couldn't wait to see how we lived, and some were even bringing their kids to learn about saving the planet. Right then, her phone rang and her boss's voice boomed through the speaker yelling about formal complaints from her entire department about body odor affecting the workplace. He said HR was now involved and there would be a mandatory meeting tomorrow morning to discuss whether she was creating a hostile work environment with her hygiene issues. Mom whispered apologies while the documentary crew stood there awkwardly filming her humiliation, and I felt this tiny flutter of something that might have been guilt, but pushed it away because this was all her idea first. The next morning, my phone rang at 7 with the principal's number, and Mom grabbed it from my hand to answer while the documentary crew filmed her panicked face. She nodded and apologized over and over while the principal talked about mandatory meetings and hygiene protocols, and I could hear his stern voice through the speaker. The crew asked if they could come along to document the community impact of our environmental lifestyle, but Mom shook her head so hard her hair whipped around. They filmed her getting ready to leave, pointing out how she seemed resistant to transparency about our commitment to saving the planet. I suggested they wait outside the school to catch her reaction afterward, and they loved that idea, packing up their equipment while Mom glared at me. When it was time to leave for school, I refused to get in the car even though freezing rain was coming down hard, reminding Mom that she's the one who said cars were killing the planet. She tried to argue, but I walked out the door and started down the sidewalk, forcing her to follow me in her work clothes and heels. The rain soaked through our clothes within minutes, and Mom's hair stuck to her head in wet strings while she tried to keep up with me. I lectured her the whole 3 miles about how real activists don't choose comfort over the environment and how disappointed I was in her weakness. Other parents drove past in their warm cars, staring at us through foggy windows as we trudged through puddles, and Mom's makeup ran down her face in black streaks. By the time we reached school, she was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering, and the secretary gasped when she saw Mom dripping all over the office floor. I loudly reminded everyone that Mom said every car trip kills polar bears while she signed me in with trembling hands. That afternoon, Vinod posted a teaser clip of our documentary online, and within 2 hours it had 300 views and dozens of comments. Our neighbors started posting about the smell coming from our yard, and someone uploaded a photo of raccoons dragging garbage bags across our lawn at midnight. Kids from the school found it and started sharing it with crying, laughing emojis and comments about how I probably smelled worse than the raccoons. I watched the view count climb past 500 and felt excited until I saw someone had screenshotted it and posted it on the school's unofficial Instagram with the caption, "When your parents take recycling too seriously." Dad came home that night with a printed list titled "Reasonable Green Living" that suggested normal things like taking shorter showers instead of no showers and composting vegetables instead of meat. I took it from him and typed it up bigger on the computer, adding Mom's signature at the bottom and putting check marks next to all her original extreme rules. I printed it poster size at the library and hung it on the fridge with "Hypocrite" written across the top in red marker. When Mom tried to take a shower that night, I stood outside with a stopwatch timing her and banging on the door after 30 seconds, yelling that she was wasting water. She came out with shampoo still in her hair, and I followed her around reading her own rules about water conservation, while soap dripped down her neck. The next day, an email arrived from Mom's HR department with "Formal warning, workplace environment concerns" in the subject line, and Mom's hands shook as she opened it on her laptop. The email detailed 17 separate complaints from coworkers about hygiene and body odor, creating a hostile work environment. It said failure to remedy the situation within 5 business days would result in immediate suspension without pay pending further review. Mom's tears dropped onto the keyboard, while Dad read over her shoulder and put his hand on her back, and I heard him whisper that maybe they needed to take control of the situation. Thursday morning, the garbage truck pulled up to our house and the driver got out, took one look at our bins, and got right back in his truck. He rolled down his window and yelled that our bags were leaking mysterious fluids, and the bins were contaminated with compost overflow. He said it was a health hazard, and we'd need to take everything to a special disposal facility ourselves at our own cost. The truck drove away, leaving 6 bags of rotting garbage on our driveway that started attracting flies immediately. By noon, 3 more bags had piled up, and even the usual raccoons seemed to avoid them, circling at a distance but not getting close. That night at 2 in the morning, our doorbell camera sent alerts to everyone's phones as motion sensors went crazy. The footage showed at least 12 raccoons tearing through our garbage in a massive raid, fighting each other over scraps and scattering trash across the entire front yard. The noise of their screeching and the bins crashing woke up the whole neighborhood, and I heard sirens approaching as someone called animal control. Within an hour, Mom's phone buzzed with an email from the HOA president calling an emergency board meeting about declaring our house a public nuisance with potential legal action. The next morning, Catherine from the school sent a formal email that Mom read aloud in a shaking voice about mandatory Child Protective Services involvement if hygiene conditions didn't improve immediately. I laughed and told the documentary crew who'd come back to film that the government just wanted to control how we lived. They filmed me reading the email dramatically, while Mom hyperventilated in the background, clutching her chest. Later that day, I came home from the school early and caught Dad plugging the refrigerator back in, trying to save what was left of our food. I immediately unplugged it again and started filling it with more seedlings for our garden while Dad's face turned red. He yelled that I was destroying Mom's career and our entire family's reputation for a stupid game. I yelled back that he never supported Mom's environmental awakening and was just another person destroying the planet. We stood there screaming at each other until the doorbell rang and we both stopped, breathing hard and glaring. Mom opened the door and Grandma stood there with her suitcase, her face excited until the smell hit her like a physical wall. She stepped back and covered her nose, then walked into the house in complete silence, carefully stepping around the compost buckets and swatting at the cloud of fruit flies. She looked at the garbage bags visible through the window, and the seedlings growing in the unplugged fridge, and the giant poster calling Mom a hypocrite. She turned to Mom and whispered what happened to her beautiful home while tears rolled down Mom's cheeks. Grandma pulled out her phone and started dialing her church group while muttering about canceling their visit tomorrow. I snatched the phone from her hands and heard Mrs. Henderson on the other end asking if everything was okay. I told her Grandma was just being modest about our amazing environmental breakthrough, and that they absolutely had to come see how modern families were saving the planet. Mrs. Henderson got excited and said she'd bring her whole prayer circle to learn about sustainable living. Grandma stared at me like I was a complete stranger while I confirmed the tour for tomorrow at 2 o'clock. The documentary crew came back into the living room with a stack of papers, and Vinod explained these were release forms for the footage they'd already shot today. Mom's hands shook as she read through them and saw words like distribution rights and broadcast permissions, while Dad kept saying we shouldn't sign anything. Vinod mentioned they had enough footage already for their project, but signing would give us some say in the final edit. Mom looked trapped between two bad choices and finally signed with a shaking hand, while Dad threw his arms up in frustration. I dragged everyone outside to show them my new water-saving shower system I'd built with a garden hose tied to the fence and a blue tarp hanging for privacy. The camera crew filmed me demonstrating it in my bathing suit even though it was 45 degrees and my teeth were chattering. Our neighbor Mr. Peterson started yelling from his yard about public indecency and grabbed his phone to call the police. Within 10 minutes, 2 officers showed up and one of them sighed when he saw our address on his tablet. They took one look at me shivering in my bathing suit under the tarp shower and asked Mom if this was really happening again. Mom's phone rang and it was someone from the school saying a social worker needed to schedule a home visit for tomorrow afternoon. Mom agreed immediately and practically begged them to come help, while I told the camera crew this was typical government overreach. Mom grabbed my arm and whispered for me to please stop talking on camera, but I pulled away and kept explaining our eco-warrior lifestyle. Later that evening, Dad cornered me in the hallway and said we needed to talk about Mom's mental health. He explained she'd always had anxiety and would latch onto new things when work got stressful. He asked me to stop using her own rules against her, and for the first time I felt a tiny bit bad. But then I remembered she started this whole thing and pushed that guilty feeling away. The next morning at the school, my phone exploded with notifications from a TikTok someone posted of me in the hallway. The video showed me walking past with visible stink lines edited in, and the caption read, "When your family takes recycling too seriously." Within 2 hours, it had 300 views and climbing while kids in the hallway started calling me compost girl. They held their noses when I walked by and made gagging sounds behind my back. My best friend Sarah pulled me aside at lunch and suggested maybe I should start showering again before this got worse. I told her she didn't understand the environmental crisis we were facing, but she just shook her head and walked away. When I got home, I found Mom hunched over her laptop trying to type an email canceling her company meeting. I'd already sent replies from her account that morning saying she was too modest about her achievements, and the tour was definitely still happening. Her inbox pinged with excited responses from coworkers saying they couldn't wait to bring their families to see our sustainable living example. Mom put her head down on the kitchen table and I heard her crying softly into her arms. The school called again saying they'd scheduled an in-person meeting for tomorrow morning about my hygiene situation. Mom specifically told them no cameras or recording devices would be allowed at that meeting. I complained to Vinod and his crew that she was being a hypocrite about transparency and openness. Vinod shifted uncomfortably and suggested that maybe some boundaries were actually healthy for families. His assistant nodded, and they started packing up their equipment like they wanted to leave. Mom's laptop dinged with another email and her face went white as she read it out loud. The HOA was scheduling an emergency hearing in 3 days, where we'd need to present a remediation plan or face legal action. Dad immediately started Googling lawyers on his phone while Mom rocked back and forth on the couch. The stress in our house felt so thick you could almost touch it and nobody was talking to each other. The next day, Dad came home with a rental truck and unloaded a small shed in our backyard. He started setting up proper recycling bins with clear labels and city-approved composting containers that actually had lids. I accused him of betraying everything Mom had taught us about zero waste and called him part of the problem. He didn't even look at me and just kept working with his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles moving. Grandma came inside later and started making lunch with the last few clean dishes we had left while I grabbed more leaves from the yard to use as plates. She looked at the pile of wet maple leaves I dumped on the counter and shook her head hard. "Absolutely not," she said, and pulled out paper plates from her purse instead. I tried to grab them, but she held them up high and told me paper was killing trees. She ignored me completely and started serving sandwiches on the disposable plates, while I stood there watching her destroy the planet. After lunch, I went to the school, and when I got back, I heard Grandma on the phone with Mom's sister talking about how Mom needed professional help immediately. She was saying something about intervention and therapy, and how the whole family was falling apart. Mom was standing in the hallway listening, and I saw tears rolling down her face before she went to her room and closed the door. That night, the documentary crew came back to film us eating dinner, and I decided this was the perfect time to make my point. When Mom tried to serve food on regular plates, I stood up and told everyone she was a hypocrite for wanting to abandon her principles just because things got hard. Mom's face crumbled right there in front of the camera and she walked out of the room without saying anything. Grandma told me I was being cruel, but I just kept eating while the crew filmed the whole uncomfortable silence that followed. Nobody talked for the rest of dinner, and you could hear every fork scraping against plates. After they stopped filming, Vinod pulled us aside and said the footage had shifted from environmental activism to family crisis, and asked if we wanted to continue. Mom immediately said no, but I said yes at the same time, and he looked between us uncomfortably. He explained that my consent as a minor didn't override parental objection, and they'd need Mom's permission to use any of the footage. The power dynamic suddenly shifted, and I realized I was losing control of the whole situation. Mom told them to delete everything, and Vinod said they'd think about it but packed up their equipment and left. Later that night, I'd left the kitchen window open for ventilation, because Mom always complained about the smell, and a huge raccoon squeezed through the gap. It went absolutely crazy in our kitchen, and knocked over all the compost bins Dad had just organized. Rotting food scattered everywhere across the floor, and the raccoon was hissing and snarling at us with foam around its mouth. Dad grabbed a broom and chased it around the kitchen while Mom stood in the doorway sobbing, and I realized the raccoon looked sick or diseased. It finally scrambled back out the window, leaving a disaster zone behind, and we spent 3 hours cleaning up the destruction. The next morning, a bright red notice from the city health department appeared on our door, and my stomach dropped when I read it. They were scheduling a mandatory inspection for tomorrow afternoon, and the violation list was long. It included pest infestation, improper waste disposal, and potential biohazard conditions, with a whole paragraph about public health risks. Even I felt nervous seeing the official seal and the mention of possible condemnation if we didn't pass the inspection. Mom found me in the kitchen and actually got down on her knees in front of me, begging me to cancel the church group tour and her company meeting. She had tears streaming down her face and her hands were shaking as she grabbed mine. I started to say no, but then I saw Dad and Grandma watching from the doorway with such disappointment on their faces that I hesitated. Still, I pulled my hands away and reminded her these were her rules first, and she's the one who started all this. Dad stepped forward and his voice was harder than I'd ever heard it when he announced I had 2 choices. Either I start following basic hygiene and help fix this mess immediately, or he's sending me to stay with Grandma whether she agrees or not. Grandma crossed her arms and said she won't take me until I've showered for a full week straight, and the smell is completely gone from my clothes and body. I looked between all 3 of them and realized they were united against me now, and there was no way to play them against each other anymore. The next morning at the school, I had to go to the meeting with the counselor and principal that Mom had tried to cancel. Catherine Bridges slid a typed document across the table that was titled Student Hygiene Compliance Plan in bold letters at the top. She explained it required daily showers with soap, clean clothes every day, and regular laundry with weekly check-ins to confirm compliance. The principal leaned forward and said if I didn't sign it right now, I'd be suspended immediately for creating a disruptive learning environment for other students. My hand shook as I signed it, because I felt completely trapped with no way out of this corner I'd painted myself into. After school, I was scrolling through my phone when I found a video someone had taken of me in the hallway that morning. It showed flies buzzing around my backpack while I walked past, and someone had set it to circus music with crying, laughing emojis all over it. The comments were brutal, with people calling me disgusting and nasty, and even kids I thought were friends were piling on with their own mean jokes. My stomach dropped as I watched the view count climb past 500 and realized I'd become the school joke that everyone was laughing at. That evening, Mom was sitting at the kitchen table when her laptop dinged with a new email, and she opened it slowly. Her face went white as she read it silently, and I saw tears rolling down her cheeks before she turned the screen toward me. It was from her company's HR department stating she was placed on formal probation with mandatory work from home until the hygiene issue was resolved. The email said multiple coworkers had filed complaints, and her presence in the office was disrupting the work environment. I finally understood that I'd actually destroyed something real in her life, and the guilt hit me like a physical punch to the stomach. The next morning, Dad woke me up at 6 and his voice was different, harder than I'd ever heard it. He stood in my doorway and told me the fridge gets plugged in right now. All garbage goes in proper bins and everyone showers today before the health inspection. I started to open my mouth to argue about the environment, but he cut me off with this look that actually made me stop talking. He dragged me outside to help move the disgusting compost bins to the curb for emergency pickup, and the smell was so bad even I was gagging. The bins were covered in this thick slime from all the rotting meat and dairy I'd thrown in there, and when I tried to grab one side, my foot slipped on the wet mess. I went down hard and twisted my ankle badly, crying out in real pain as the bins tipped over and covered me in maggots and rotting garbage. Dad and Mom both rushed over and pulled me out of the pile while I sobbed from both the pain shooting through my ankle and the total humiliation of being covered in decomposing food waste. Mom drove us to urgent care while I sat in the back seat on towels, still picking maggots out of my hair and trying not to throw up from the smell of myself. The doctor examined my swollen ankle and then noticed all these red rashes on my arms and legs from the bacteria in the compost. She gave us this whole lecture about basic sanitation while treating me, asking if our home had running water and proper facilities like she thought we were living in some third world situation. Mom held my hand the whole time, even though I'd basically ruined her entire life, and I felt so ashamed I couldn't even look at her. On the car ride home, Mom reached over from the driver's seat and squeezed my hand gently without saying anything at all. I squeezed back and my throat got all tight with tears. I was trying not to cry, and we just rode in silence that felt less angry and more just completely exhausted. Dad watched us in the rearview mirror, and I saw something in his face that looked like maybe we could fix this somehow. My phone buzzed with a text from Vinod saying their footage had turned into something way darker than they intended, and warning it might end up on local news as a cautionary tale instead of an environmental piece. The idea that everyone in town would see our family's total breakdown on TV made me feel physically sick, and I finally whispered to Mom that I was sorry. She didn't say anything, but squeezed my hand again, and we spent the next 3 hours before the health inspection cleaning everything we possibly could. Dad hauled load after load of trash to the proper disposal facility, while Mom and I scrubbed every surface with actual cleaning products that probably killed a million germs. Grandma opened every single window and lit candles everywhere, trying to get rid of the smell, and for the first time in weeks, we all worked together without fighting. The health inspector showed up right at 2 o'clock with his clipboard and started walking through, taking notes and photos of everything. We all held our breath while he checked the kitchen, bathrooms, and backyard, writing stuff down without any expression on his face. He finally gave us a conditional pass with this huge list of requirements, including professional pest control within 48 hours, proper waste management systems, and weekly follow-up inspections for the next month. We weren't condemned, but he made it clear we were on super thin ice, and one more violation would mean serious consequences. Later that day, Mom went to her rescheduled company meeting at a restaurant downtown, where her boss put her on a performance improvement plan, but at least didn't fire her. She had to agree to work from home for another whole month and attend counseling through the Employee Assistance Program, which was basically admitting she had problems. She texted Dad that she still had her job, and when he read it, he actually teared up with relief right there in the kitchen. The next morning, Grandma's church friends showed up for their visit that Mom managed to keep to just the front porch and backyard by explaining we were renovating inside. They seemed confused but stayed polite and left after maybe 20 minutes with these careful smiles that showed they knew something was weird. Grandma hugged Mom after they left and told her she was proud of her for setting boundaries, which was the first nice thing anyone had said to Mom in weeks. That afternoon, I had to go back to the school and officially sign the hygiene plan in front of Catherine Bridges and the principal. The document required daily showers with soap, clean clothes every single day, and Mom driving me to the school in bad weather instead of walking. Catherine said she was pleased to see our family working together to solve this problem, and I realized it was the first time in weeks any adult had said something positive about us at all. 2 days later, Vinod showed up at our door with release forms and his camera guy, both wearing masks this time, which made me feel worse than any insult could have. Mom sat us all down at the kitchen table that still had faint stains from the compost disaster, while Vinod explained they'd already edited most of the footage, but wanted one final interview to wrap things up. He pushed the papers across the table, and I saw terms like liability waiver and image rights that made my stomach drop because this was really happening and everyone would see what we'd become. Mom asked about having our faces blurred, and Vinod nodded, saying they could do that plus change our names if we signed today. Otherwise, they'd use what they already had with no changes at all. Dad grabbed the pen first and signed, then Mom, then me with shaking hands, while Vinod promised they'd frame it as a cautionary tale about taking things too far, rather than just making fun of us, which wasn't much comfort, but was better than nothing. After they left, Mom pulled out a fresh notebook and said we needed to make real changes that actually worked for everyone, not just her anxiety or my rebellion. Dad suggested starting with basics like getting a proper compost bin that followed city guidelines, and Mom actually smiled for the first time in weeks. I added that maybe we could get those water-saving shower heads that still let you get clean, and Mom wrote it down without arguing. We spent 2 hours making lists of reasonable changes like using the dishwasher on eco mode instead of leaves from the yard, keeping the fridge plugged in but set to energy-saving temperature, and limiting new environmental projects to 1 per month maximum. Everyone signed the paper and Dad taped it to the fridge where Mom's old extreme rules used to hang, and it felt like we were actually a family making decisions together instead of fighting all the time. The pest control guy came that week and spent 3 days dealing with the raccoon damage and rat problem while we scrubbed every surface with real cleaning products until the house finally stopped smelling like death. Mom went to her first therapy appointment through work and came back quiet but said it was helping her understand why she got so obsessed with things when she felt out of control. The HOA inspector came by and agreed to a payment plan for the fines since we were clearly making progress and had documentation from the health department showing compliance. Kids at the school had mostly moved on to gossiping about some senior who got caught cheating on the SATs, though I still got called compost girl sometimes in the hallway. So yeah, I definitely went way too far with the whole thing, and Mom and I still don't totally trust each other yet. But at least I can flush without getting lectured about polar bears. And Mom learned that maybe going full extreme on everything isn't the answer. Plus the raccoons found some other house to terrorize, which a win. Thanks for sticking around and wondering through all this with me today. Kinda makes you look at things a little differently, right? I'll see you in the next one. Like the video, it helps more than you think.